welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and will be available on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and today I am just delighted to welcome back to the morning show Aine Greaney. She grew up on a small farm in County Mayo, Ireland. In the mid-1980s, she became one of the estimated 200,000 young Irish people who immigrated to the United States. Her fifth published book is called Trespassers and Other Stories, and I'm really delighted to say that's what she's here to talk about today. It just came out in March from Sea Crow Press. Her work has been cited in Best American Essays, and her second novel, called Dance Lessons, was named a great group read by the Women's National Book Association, so that's on my to-read list. Her essay, Sanctuary, was also nominated for a Pushcart Prize. So Aine, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for visiting the show today to talk about Trespassers and Other Stories.
Thank you, Mary. It's great to be back here and in our local media hub.
Well, it's wonderful to have you, and I want to talk to you about two things today. First, the craft of short story writing, and then the themes of your stories regarding immigration, social class, and feelings of displacement. But first, let's talk about the short story form, because you've written two novels and an excellent collection of essays. But this new book is a collection of short stories, which is in my opinion, a very challenging form, which you appear to me to have totally mastered. I often think there's a famous line from Blaise Pascal, who wrote a letter to a friend, and he apologized for writing such a long letter because he said he didn't have time to write a short one. So I always think of that when I compare novels and short stories. But each story in your book, to me, it offers a whole microcosm of a person's mind and soul and life. You get a sense of what they're thinking about, what the place they're inhabiting is like, the people they're interacting with, and the memories, because memory is a strong theme in your book, that they're carrying that shape both their sense of themselves and their sense of their own possibilities and limitations in some cases. So, as you know, because you're a novelist, you get hundreds of pages when you're a novelist. And in a short story, you only have 4 or 5 or so. So I was really curious to find out, when a character or a story or a situation comes to you that you think, oh, I want to write about that, how do you decide whether you're going to go with the short story or the novel? And do you agree with Pascal?
Oh, I do, yeah. Well, I certainly agree with Pascal, and I've heard that also, where a preacher said, I would have delivered a long sermon, but I would have delivered a short sermon, but it would have taken longer. Yeah. I think, well, first, obviously I went to school in Ireland, and we were fed a fairly hefty diet of short stories, fiction, on our school curriculum, the equivalent of language arts curriculum. And we had them in 3 languages, actually, in Irish, English, and French. And Guy de Maupassant's stories, to me, were, I thought I was him, sort of a kind of a virtual reality switcheroo. And the Irish stories, and then the English stories were the typical canon authors, if you will, most of them male. Not all, though. So that kind of, when I was younger and started out writing, that was my default form, because that's what I had been raised on, essentially. It never occurred to me that I would go longer than a short story, because that's the tradition I had grown up in from an educational point of view. In terms of what determines which I will write in, I think definitely place has a lot to do with it. And these stories, when I decided to draw them into a collection, half of them had been published before. And when I reread them, first I was shocked by how overwritten they were, because we change as writers, we become sharper at editing, hopefully, as we go along. But I did notice that place played a big part in the stories, and were almost its own. The place was very influential in the story. But I think when one place really speaks to you, a lot of times the story has to take place in that place. Now, it, like as you said, Mary, can go back into backstory and memory and history, but the main story is happening in one defined place, and the place is a driver in that story and in the plot and what the characters say to each other. So place is one. And then the other thing that drives it is, I know this will sound odd, but, for example, in that story, House Devil.
Yeah. It was one of my favorites.
I had a dream about
Did you really?
flying. I won't give away the story.
No.
I had a dream.
No, because the ending to me was a real surprise. Very
very
satisfying ending, but surprising.
Vivid. That's based on a waking up from a dream of me flying over a kind of a busy, fun party, but I was flying overhead and watching everybody, and then they noticed me and got scared.
Interesting.
So I was kind of ziplining over a
Okay.
party. So I literally took that from a dream and then wrote the whole story around it.
Yeah.
Again, that was one of the stories that had been published on its own, but I changed it in this version. I made the plot a little tighter. So I think what influences is, I'm kind of given this gift of a pre-written story just from being asleep. Or if it's a heavy place, will be a short story. Whereas with a novel, you're changing the setting, not always, but you're changing it. There's enough room in those pages to chip and chop between country and city, seaside and inland,
Right.
So, but I think place, and then just, never look a gift horse if you've dreamed it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Accept the gift of the muse.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting, Anya. Thank you for that. And it makes sense to me, having read your stories, that the place is a character, so
Almost
to speak.
a character.
It's the sense of place is very strong.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. That was really interesting. Well, I want to talk about your collection's title, Trespassers, is that of the first story. And I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the title story and what made you decide that you wanted to use this story and its title to represent your collection.
That was another story that had been published in the Larkham Review, which was a locally founded literary journal. I changed it again. When I read the old story, I knew it needed to be tweaked and changed a little. The theme was pretty much the same. And it's about, a very wealthy couple, a Boston couple. He's a lawyer. She comes from a long line of New England wealth. And it's move-in day, and they're moving in for the summer into the wife's ancestral estate on Cape Cod, in a kind of a remote beach on Cape Cod. This was another place-inspired story.
Yeah.
The estate includes this private beach, and it has no trespassers signs on it, which, if you've ever been to the Cape, you've seen those. And I think I wanted to write a story about, or I don't think I intended this, but this is what came out, was on the end of my pen, was, we're all trespassers on somebody else's land.
Yeah.
If you go back enough generations, we're nearly all trespassing on somebody else's land. And often, I walk through the cemetery off the trail here in town, and it's very interesting to watch the gravestones and who's where and what position and how old is one gravestone compared to an almost new one. So in one way or another, many or most of us are trespassing on somebody's land. And, even when we take a new job, we're inheriting what went before us and the person who had that job previously So that was kind of the inspiration for it, about who really owns what. And then, of course, I, got into my research, and I looked up the statute, the Massachusetts statute, which is similar to the Maine statute, as a matter of fact, around who can walk on a beach and who cannot legally, from a legal point of view. And that statute in Massachusetts is actually very old. I don't have the exact date in my head now, but it's really old. But whoever crafted that statute themselves were a trespasser.
Yeah.
Unless it was an indigenous
We're
person.
all trespassers.
We're all trespassers.
And then, fair to say, thieves in a lot of
in some ways, in many ways.
Yeah.
So then it became kind of in my head, I thought, when I saw this pattern of place, going back to that issue of place, and how uncomfortable some of the characters felt and how misfit they felt in their current place, I thought, well, Trespassers kind of suits that. It works it. It's the only story with a man as a male character, which in some ways almost fits as well. It's the only one with a male character who's the main character. But definitely I saw that theme of people being in misfit places and places that maybe they wish they weren't, or that they've been cast back into. So that became the lead or the title story for the book.
And just because, what does the statute say?
There's fishing, let me think, fishing, fouling, and what's the third one? It begins with an F as well. And also in Massachusetts, it gets kind of subtle about the tidal, the tide line, the tide line, about if you can or cannot walk. Just walking. You're not sitting there, with your sunscreen and your beach chair and your boombox. You're just walking on a beach, either to stroll or to take a shortcut through. It's easily found online, actually, but there definitely are exemptions for those who are fishing and fouling, and I'm blanking on the third one, but also the tide line counts about what's considered.
About how you would measure
correct.
what can be considered private property and what the public has access rights to.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have to look at it. I used to know it, but I have to look it up.
Fascinating,
It is
actually.
interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the coast of the country and access to the ocean, which is a public resource, and it's the planet's resource. I guess we're trespassing. The animals, the earth owns itself, really,
actually,
and we introduce these artificial lines. So I understand now. Thank you for the ways in which all the other stories include themes of displacement, immigration, present and past, and where home is. And so
indeed.
that thank you. I understand now what would have made that, what makes it a perfectly apropos title for all the stories. Following up on that, most of the stories involve characters going back and forth mentally and sometimes physically between Ireland and the U.S. And you've described your stories as speaking to anybody who has felt, I'm quoting you here, torn between two versions of themselves. And most of us, I think, can relate to that. But I was hoping you could talk about how you felt this tug in your own immigrant experience and give an example or two of how characters that you write about encounter this duality and how they cope with it.
Yeah, you're right, Mary. I think all of us deal with that. How many things do you read about somebody goes back home for Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
And they're bringing a different version of themselves to that table.
Right.
And there's the grown-up, out-of-state version.
That's right.
Slightly the same, but
or the
not
grown-up version. I've been separate from my family long enough that I discovered who I was, and they're not going to understand it when I go back home again, or like it.
Or like it, really.
Yeah.
I think for myself, when I landed here in the late 80s, you don't know where you are for the first few months, and it was winter, and I thought the winter was some kind of a sci-fi movie. Like you can't. Icicles can't.
A lot more snow.
Like
a lot colder.
Icicles from the window can't grow that long. It's impossible. But also, I think once you kind of came to and got over the jet lag and got used to the icicles and that your nostrils would freeze up when you went outside.
Inside your nose.
Inside your nose. I think, you're trying to fit in and you're trying to, call French fries and not chips, and you don't, you talk about the boot of the car and somebody looks at you like, what? It's the trunk, okay, and it's not a car park, it's a parking lot. So you're making these linguistic transitions and, also probably in some mannerisms and that. And you're really just trying to fit in. And I think many young people try to just fit in with the environment around them. When you transition to college, you're trying to fit into that dorm life. So you're doing that. But then, while you're doing that, you don't know that there's going to come a day when you fly back to visit the family, and you land at the airport, and the rental car person is raising their voice and patronizing because they assume you're a tourist and you've never been there before. Or I love, more than once, I've heard myself being talked about in Asgaelga or in Irish.
Oh.
Because they assume I'm a tourist.
Oh, interesting.
And it's quite amusing to sit across a train table listening to yourself being talked about.
And do you intervene? Do you start?
Oh no, because then they'll stop. I want to hear what they,
Of course.
to hear what they have to say here.
And it's material for stories.
Totally. Or I remember in a bar one time, not that far from where I grew up, two young gentlemen came in and ordered their drinks and started in, and I learned quite a bit about that I should probably go to the beauty salon more frequently. Maybe even the plastic surgeon.
Oh, dear.
And I just sat there like, talk away. I did intervene there, and it was quite delightful. But not before I had heard all their prescriptive beauty tips for me, shall we say. So you're trying to fit in your home country now as well.
Yes, interesting.
And you let slip, it's like many times I've let slip the American term in Ireland. So you're kind of linguistically, which is a symbol for what's happening emotionally as well, you're trying to flip-flop back and forth and be sort of accepted in both places. That's when you're young, Mary. Age is a grand thing.
It is a grand
Not
thing.
in all ways, but it's a grand thing in that you kind of come to this place where I am who I am now in real time, and actually these tags are immaterial. Really, they're totally immaterial, and what matters is who you are and who you are to your neighbours and to the people in your life and your cat. And in the larger society, how much are you doing and contributing? And whether you're flying, what flag are you flying under? Who cares? It's who you are now in real time, and who you are in the middle of the night when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you're looking at yourself in the bathroom mirror.
Right.
I've let go a lot of that stuff. So if I have an American twang, so what? It's what I'm saying that matters. Not whether I'm calling French fries chips or French fries.
Right, absolutely.
The fish and French fries has a weird ring. I'm sorry, it just does.
It does. But burger and fries is the more common combination.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
So, oh, that's interesting. There's another story that I wanted to ask you about because I'm just very interested in the phenomenon. The story is called American Wake, and it just intrigued me. And so could you teach us about what this type of, party, I guess, was, why families held them, and do they still hold them? Did you have one?
Well, every time I would be coming back, my family would have one, but jokingly.
Oh.
The text would go around.
Yeah.
What are we doing for your American wake, quote unquote. And it would vary from one year it was chili, pot chili and some bread, and another year I think we ordered in pizza or whatever,
Okay.
But in history, it was about a person immigrating to America, obviously, famine, post-famine. I'm not sure if it continued into the 1950s when there was kind of the second large transatlantic immigration wave. I'm not sure if they held them then. I had 4 of my grandmother's family immigrated here. 2 brothers and 2 sisters. One never went back ever.
Oh.
The other visited. I remember her well. In fact, she would come back once, Aer Lingus started doing transatlantic flights. She was a large part of my sense of America, including the Estee Lauder perfume that you could smell all over the house. Just an aside there. But they did hold these wakes that weren't for somebody dead. It was for somebody immigrating, which in terms of contact, pre-telephone, pre-everything, and letters took a fortnight or 2 weeks to get. My grandmother always told me that. So they would hold these all-night wake, essentially. Like you said, lots of party, lots of booze. Even in one account I read, I don't know how accurate this is, they had the keeners, the professional weepers. And then I think the tradition was that in the morning they would walk the immigrant, or soon-to-be immigrant, down to the horse and trap, or however they were getting to the train and then getting to the boat, the ship. So it was an all-night affair, and it really was a wake, because they might never see that person again, ever.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot, that they would never see their sibling, they would never see their daughter.
Very poignant.
Yeah, it's really poignant.
Yeah.
I mean, in the story American Wake, I took a very modern situation, a divorcing couple. It's told from the point of view of their teenage daughter. And, she's trying to come to terms with her parents' divorce. Very previously wealthy, now bankrupt, real estate bankrupt parents. And her mother gets a sign-on bonus here in Boston at a hospital, because she was, before all the wealth and all the glittery life, she was a nurse. So she does what she knows how to do, which is to make a living. So I had great fun taking a historic event that my grandmother had told me about. We lived with our grandparents, so I was the recipient of a lot of oral history, and that I had looked up and researched and knew about from an early age, the American Wake, and took it and plopped it, kind of grafted it onto a modern day situation in which a family live a very upper middle class wealthy life, and then that life is gone, and I had great fun doing that, actually. It was just grafting history onto a modern day story.
Yeah. And there's the theme in the story as well. It's not just the adjustment to coming to America, but adjusting to being a different social class, to being a different economic class, and the teenager kind of adjusting and dealing with, I think shock is the fair word for the circumstances she finds her mother living in, when she comes to this country. So it's a very interesting story.
But interestingly, in that story, the mother is more emancipated. The teenager remarks how in America, mom seems to be the boss.
Yeah.
She's good at getting free bus shuttles, and she's good at, getting a little attic, pokey little no air conditioning flat or apartment at the top of a house. So while there's a major downturn in their, financial fortunes, mom has gone off and built her own life, while poor dad back in Dublin hasn't. Not really.
Yeah.
So
it's just full of contrast, which is part of what makes it interesting. So, well, you've said that when you moved from rural Ireland to America in 1986, I think it was, you came to America not to get rich, which is what most people think of as the American dream, and not specifically to get published, although happily you have, but to get young. And Anya, what do you mean by that? What had aged you?
Oh.
And do you feel that you did manage to get young?
Well, I'll answer the last part first, Mary. I have, I think, not if I look in the mirror, but inside at least. I've pivoted.
Which, as you were saying, is the only thing that really matters.
At 3 a.m. I've pivoted more times than I could count in this country. I'm even now, I'm in the middle of taking, it's a poetry challenge every morning. And I'm up there in my little attic room in Newburyport, and I don't know the first thing about poetry. It was never part of my curriculum in college or in school. It was in school, to just read the masters of poetry, the Yeatses and the probably similar to what you had, the canon of Western poetry. But I don't know anything about the workings of it, and I don't know how to make a poem. I really don't. And that's what I love about not knowing. I love the diving in, doing it with people who probably do know. And that's what jumpstarts my sense of self and imagination. And I've done that over the years, over and over again. I went back to graduate school in this country. I've changed jobs more times than I've changed socks. Not because and even within the same job, I don't mind taking on a new role. Because, like in one essay in the essay collection, I think I refer to it as an etch-a-sketch country.
Oh, yes.
Where you can draw and then just take it away and start again. I'm not sure that that's true now, but when I arrived here, which was almost 87, it felt like that. It felt like the possibilities were there. So it did make me feel younger. I think what made me feel old, by contrast, in Ireland when I left was, we'd been over 10 years into the European Union at that stage. 1973, we joined the European Union. So there were opportunities for women out there, but not for women, from rural areas, or at least not in my orbit. So you were offered 3 career opportunities, all very women, typically female opportunities. And, college was this kind of Netherland in a way. It was this land where you were free and, probably having too much fun looking back on it. And, I took French, which I loved, I just loved it. And we had 2 professors from Paris. I mean, how much more could you kid yourself that you're, French or something than that? And one of my professors was the Seamus Heaney, the famous Seamus Heaney. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
So again, you were rubbing elbows with these, famous poets, and so you're in this kind of virtual reality of college in a way, and being in the city in Dublin, lovely and anonymous. And then you graduate, and with it, in rural areas, we had a 20% unemployment rate in the country. Yeah. So if you got a job, which I did by the skin of my teeth, you knew there was no looking at the horizon to see what was beyond the horizon, because there was nothing. There was a 20% unemployment rate. Yeah. And I found that really burdensome and aging. And, I had sleep issues, I remember that. And just a side story, I remember in my insomnia there was a probably pirate radio station from Northern Ireland that had a lot of American country music on it, and I still love country music to this day. And one of the highlights of my life was to go see Emmylou Harris live, because when I was awake and frantic in my little attic flat in Ireland, Emmylou was my pal.
All right, okay.
Yeah. But that's aging. A pack of cigarettes a day doesn't help either. And the insomnia is aging. But I think the most aging thing was that this is it the rest of my whole adult life. The expectation that you would have and hang on to your female-defined job, become a wife, and possibly become a parent if you were lucky to become a parent. And I just felt like I've already pre-lived the life that was prescribed for me. Yeah. So that's aging. And I did feel old by the time I got here. I felt worn out, to be honest. Yeah. Insomnia will do that to you.
Well, for sure, but then it sounds like kind of a reincarnation then to come to a different country where there's another way of defining the American dream, and that's the sense of being able to create an experiment even with different selves and have different kinds of economic opportunity, in contrast to, I remember my mother always used to say it was teacher, nurse, and nun, because she was from an Irish Catholic
Don't
family.
forget secretary.
And secretary,
yes.
That's right. So that's really interesting, Anya. Thank you for
You must have been in that career guidance office with me.
I've also had many, many jobs. Well, your stories also explore tensions within families, especially parents and children. And I was hoping you could talk about maybe one of the stories that you feel shows how, especially well, the immigrant experience impacts or exacerbates those always present conflicts and challenges that exist between parents and children.
Yeah, definitely. Like Snow comes to mind immediately, the story called Snow, where the snow, which would be not that common in Ireland, in a small town, is, becomes the kind of image for what's going on in the family. And it's an American woman, Irish born, but American, lives on the South Shore. I decided to give the South Shore a little airtime. And she's hauled home to take care of her estranged and widowed father. The relationship is not good. He's pretty much cut her off. But she's the only child, and she's got a marriage and a business and a dog and the whole lot on the South Shore. And she arrives home kind of reluctantly, and there's also a linguistic back and forth between them, because he's obviously Irish speaking and she's obviously American English speaking. And she even gets the news of his heart attack in Irish, And, that story is not just about the conflict. Like, the linguistic push and pull becomes, the mirror of the push and pull between them as a parent and an adult child. But also the story is about memory and the push and pull between how much will you choose to remember and acknowledge about your childhood, and how much will you bury. So that's maybe exhibit A of that story. I mean, this other story that comes to mind is the granny flat, which is Irish for an in-law apartment above the garage. And that daughter has returned to live in Dublin with her American husband, because she works for a multinational, and her American-born child. Mm-hmm. And Granny, the mom, the Irish mother, lives upstairs in the in-law apartment. And the push and pull there is huge. It's really huge for various reasons. And once again, that one, you have to go back into memory to kind of get to the root. The characters, have to go back into the memory to get to the root of this, lack of a perfect relationship. Yeah,
which can be a very hard thing to do, but a very healing thing to do as well as you go through it. So, well, is there? And I acknowledge this is like asking a parent who their favorite child is, but is there one story that you feel like, wow, I really knocked it out of the park with that one?
Not really. I'm the worst critic of my own work. I mean, I've had stories and I've had essays published, and I open them up on publication day and I say, oh, look at line 3, how could the editor have missed that? I redline them all. Months, years, or on the day of publication. So it's hard for me. I have a favorite character that I'd love to, take into my house and just hug. And that's the character in the story That Night. She's a teenager. Her mother is Irish in Boston. The mother, again, is very conflicted and untruthful about her Irishness. And the daughter is a first-generation child, and she's really only a kid with attitude galore in Boston. And Lucy is her name. And, if I could make a hot dinner and, some scones for Lucy, I would. I just have a fondness for her. And sort of a fondness for her situation, and the setting there for me was huge too. This urban Boston setting with a lot of partying, like really a lot of partying. Yeah. So I think Lucy would be the one I'd, buy her a new coat and make her dinner and
well, since you're a creative person, you can write another story in which those good things happen.
For Lucy, yeah.
For Lucy. Well, you've taken your pen to nonfiction works as well, and you've written a book called Inspiration and Exercises to help you craft a writing life alongside your career, because, as we all know, it can be very, very challenging to actually make a living as a writer. And so I just wanted to ask you, what is one or two of the most helpful suggestions or important suggestions that you have for people who love to write, who not see themselves? I think in one, I don't remember where I read it, but you said you're not you are a writer. It's
Right.
not that you write, you are a writer.
Right.
And so for people who are writers and yet are having that kind of challenge in terms of balancing what you have to do to make a living with expressing who you are in the world, maybe what have you found, or what have readers told you? Yeah, that was really helpful.
I think, first of all, it's kind of an attitudinal shift of that, you're right, it's writing is who you are, not what you do. And I'm stealing that quote from the American poet Mary Ruffalo, which I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right. So you have to believe that you deserve to write. And yes, I know you've childcare, and sometimes you've elder parental care, caregiving to do, and your day job, and your taxes to pay, and the house to clean. But if you believe that you deserve to write, and that it's part of who you are, and that you're shortchanging other people by not following that.
Yeah.
So the deserve is big for me, and it was a big kind of a aha moment for me back when. I think the second thing is to find the time that you can do it and kind of alter your perception of what to write means. I taught a course at a distance, obviously, because it was for a group of healthcare clinicians in Seattle. So I didn't go to Seattle, though I struggled with the time difference. But I had a physician there who, in our post-class discussions and Q&A and everything, she brought up this issue, and she said what she does, you have to have a workaround. And she said, on really busy days, I just tell myself a story into my phone.
Oh,
I sit
interesting.
I drive to the hospital early for my shift, a little bit early. I sit in my car, I take out my iPhone, and I know I have to be me and not write, but sort of write. And she's like, does that count as writing? And I said, wait a minute. Long before any of us learned how to write.
Oral tradition.
The
Iliad.
Yes. We were raised on the oral tradition long before the written tradition.
Interesting.
But I tell that story as an example of, as a busy working writer, you have to have fallbacks.
Yeah.
And, while I'm waiting for the airport for my business flight, can I do 10 minutes?
Right.
With a cup of bad airport coffee
Right.
in hand? Can I do a one little page of my phone or my notebook? You do have to shift your expectations, but you do have to keep the expectation of 3 times a week, 4 times a week, whatever your calendar allows. I will do this.
Right.
And I'm still writing just because I only did one little page. You've still written today.
It's not quantity.
It's
continuity.
Continuity, exactly.
I really like your emphasis on name yourself, claim your identity, because if you're a writer, and there's not a lot you can do about it, and it will make you unhappy.
Exactly, and people wouldn't want to be around you anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
You'd be so grumpy. You'd be so grumpy that nobody would want to be around you.
And I love picturing somebody just tell your phone the story.
Yeah.
It's there. You created it, and that's what matters. It's exercising your imagination, which is what writers need to do. Well, you talked about presenting to healthcare professionals, and I'm also intrigued because I know you write, you teach workshops called wellness writing, and which is such an intriguing kind of phrase. So tell us a little bit about what you define as wellness writing.
Well, here again is one of my pivots, Mary. I became fascinated by this. I've worked in nonprofit healthcare for a long time now. And I became fascinated by that there had to have been some crossover between writing and feeling better.
Yeah.
Because that's how it worked for me when I was a teenager. I was a teenager with all the usual teenager stuff. And that's when I started writing. And I went to a conference around this topic, and that was it. I was away to the races,
Yeah.
And it was great to be around people who, this was what they did. So I took a lot of trainings. Again, I love to learn.
Clearly.
And
Which keeps you young.
Keeps me young, yeah. I just last year last fall I took a training even at Duke University about helping others to write for health.
Yeah.
And I loved it, of course. They almost had to kick me out of the course. But so it's about, it's wellness writing, or, the kind of clinical term is expressive writing.
Okay.
And it's about, there's many clinical studies, well over 300, that say for some of us it can improve our physical health and our mental health and our emotional health. And even when there's nothing going on in our lives and we're perfectly happy, dappy, it's a way of controlling what happens to us, because we can't control what happens to us. I might have a fender bender when I leave this parking lot, excuse me.
Right.
But if I write about it and how I feel about it and its meaning within my life, and I address it both emotionally and cognitively, then the fender bender, I'm less whiplashed. We'll stay with the car metaphors. I have some control over that incident now, whereas I had no control over the person who fender bendered me. You gain a sense of control, and this is clinically proven among many university-based studies, hospital-based studies. So it's a way of just making ourselves feel better. And like I say, it'll start out emotionally, and sometimes it's a rage page. I call them rage pages.
It's a good name.
But you do notice a trend as you write over and over about an event, that you transition over from the rage pages into some cognitive work, where you're starting to say, now what does this mean, and what are my next steps, and what can I do to avoid this in the future, or whatever questions you're asking yourself. So as you can probably tell, this is my passion. I love this. And and I love I work with a local nonprofit group on a volunteer basis, and one of the most touching things I heard was after my last session with them, a person emailed me who was in that group, we call it a student, a participant. And she said, I was in such and such a town this morning and I saw a sign saying, "What makes you smile?" And she said, I immediately thought of your class.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
What a wonderful compliment.
I know.
Oh, that's great.
Well, not just a compliment, but going back to the making meaning.
Right, that's right. Very gratifying. Is the more accurate thing to say. So gratifying.
The rest of my week was perfect.
Right, that's right.
So you go back to the identity issue. That's your identity. That's my identity.
That's right. Which is clearly always growing and deepening and expanding.
Exactly. So,
And, well, that's wonderful. I love the way you talk about that. I love the idea of using writing as a way of creating meaning out of something that has happened to you that you couldn't control.
Right.
But you assume control over the one thing we can have control over, and that's the meaning that we make of things that happen to us in our life, and writing is the tool, the vehicle that can enable us to do that, and that's very powerful. So, well, there's one more thing I want to ask you about, because I think I could talk to you all day, but we don't have time for that. And you're going to be part of the upcoming Newburyport Literary Festival, one of the best weekends in the year, every year. And that's coming up from Friday the 25th through Sunday the 27th. And you are part of an event that's going to be happening Saturday, April 26th at 7 p.m., which is the theme of this year's festival, and that's the importance of being a reader. So, Anya, tell us about what you're going to be participating in at that event.
Well, it's a very short reading, and I actually will be reading one of the stories from Trespassers, not the full story, obviously, but a portion of it, and that's set in the North Shore and mostly on an MBTA commuter train. Gee, I wonder where I got inspiration for that. And I'm just excited, Mary, because not just to be in the limelight or whatever, but that it's the 20th anniversary of the Literary Festival.
It is,
this is what's at the heart of it, is celebrating being a reader. And, on a personal level, reading completely changed my life as a child. It completely. I wouldn't be sitting here now talking to you if I hadn't picked up a paperback kiddie novel when I was about 8. I wouldn't. So I'm really excited and honoured to be a part of it. Both from the local Newburyport point of view, but also globally. That, it's advancing literacy, it's advancing discussion, storytelling, so yeah, I'm thrilled.
Wonderful. Well, that's it for today, Anya. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to the morning show and to share Trespassers with us and your substantial wisdom about being a writer and about living in our world. So thank you for that. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Yeah. Anya has a website. It's easy to remember, www.ainegraaney.com. And for more information about the Literary Festival, that's newburyportliteraryfestival.org. And so please join us again next week for the morning show. When speaking of the Literary Festival, my guests will be the two honorees from the festival, Vicki Hendrickson, founder of the Newburyport Literary Festival, and Sue Little, founder of Jabberwocky Books, and Jill Gross will also be here, and she's taking over the helm of the Literary Festival going forward. So please join us next Thursday at 9 for that. Until then, everybody, please be well.